All right, welcome back. So now we're going to go ahead and ink these, and basically I'm just looking for the big shapes first. And so I want to start this one with the shapes of shadows, really talk about what I go for, what my goal is. And so my goal is to obviously clean up the work, but also find stylistic choices as I do this, little angles, little different ways to explain various shapes. So I might draw a nose a specific way for quite some time, then find a new shape that, I don't know, just looks more creative and something that I start to think might be a better fit for my style. So as I'm shaping this, I'm always looking for those new and inventive ways to draw and ultimately shape and stylize the variety of elements within a face, within a character. And I think that's one of the things that allows us to continually develop our art style, but also find ways to save time. I'm a big fan of that. If there's something that I can draw stylistically with a more simplified shape and it still looks good, I'm still happy with the end result, then I'm definitely going to incorporate that into my art style. We have to also remember that when we get better at drawing things based upon looking at the shapes of shadows, it relates really well to size reduction. So when you go to draw your smaller versions of your characters, you really lend to that way of thinking, those big shapes of shadows that, again, simplify the work, make it read more quickly to the viewer. So it's definitely something to really zero in on and pay attention to. Another thing that I think is helpful when doing this is looking for patterns. So if you notice with the hair-like shape, it could be overly repetitive C or curves, moon-like shapes side by side. But if I left it that way, it just wouldn't have the sense of flow or fold. So what I do is, even though I repeat those shapes of those C-like bends, I occasionally cut into them, and it starts to create this sort of W or M-like shape that I usually see, especially on the side of the hair there. But again, looking for those patterns when you're inking can, again, aid with simplifications, aid with speed, give you a sense of comfort, all that good stuff. So look for those patterns. And so now with the shapes of shadows in place, we can start the rendering phase for this first lit scenario. And again, a real simple way to think about this is if you were to point your lines towards the light source, that's one way to explain the idea that is going from dark to light. Another way is just to crosshatch them multiple, 2 times, 3 times, different angles, and each time creating a sense of gradient or light and shadow, just dark to light. And you're basically softening up the edging of that. But again, you want to think about the underlying form and the character in this case as a 3-dimensional object and try to round over to that. So for this next example, I'm going to start with just line art, mainly too because I want to expedite this and show the variation, show the different approach. But I'll use the line art for the third as well. But the thing is that when you go with this approach, it can be great in a systematic breakdown of the artwork. So you're creating different lines and nice clean lines all the way through. Maybe you zero in on line weight, but in this case I didn't because I'm going to fill in a lot of that with shadowing anyways and rendering. So I'll leave the line weight more to the end. But it did give me that next version that I needed for the third example. But the only drawback to this part is I feel like it almost takes a little bit longer because now we still have to go back and get in our shapes of shadows and stuff like that. So this is just personal preference. You'll want to try different variations of all this. Do you feel more comfortable blocking in big shadows? Do you feel more comfortable with a large brush versus a very thin brush? Do you feel more comfortable with a marker versus a fine point pen? All these things will affect your style, your comfort as you move through the artwork. So again, play with these variables. It really helps you to zero in on, what your strengths are or what you currently feel more comfortable doing at this moment. And also remember that if you feel stuck, if you feel like you're not progressing, sometimes it can be really nice to jump in with a different approach. Like, so for instance, if you feel better using that thinner line approach, maybe challenge yourself the next day or for the next week to use a big marker and see if you can shake something loose. Sometimes we get a little bit too caught up in our repetitious, monotonous behavior, and it kind of stifles our creativity, or at least that's what I've experienced. So now you can see with this one, I'm trying to put those really deep, big shapes of shadows under the chin, under the eyes, under the nose, going for those major plane changes, and getting, and also adding a larger volume of shadow. Now, there's a lot more nuances to light and shadow, like how far back is the light behind the head? Is it a spotlight versus environmental lighting? There's a lot of variables. So this is meant to be, again, a simplification of these ideas to get you rolling, to get you thinking about this and practicing in some different ways. But the main thing is just to take your sketches like this and move that light around and experiment, so that you do start to open up to the possibilities. And again, the simplest way to look at this is go for those big shapes. And then from there, you can always break into the secondary details, the forehead wrinkles, the wrinkles around the mouth, things like that. But first, get those major plane changes in. Okay, so now we're going to start rendering this. And again, same concept. If you want to keep it very simple, just think of the shadow breaking apart into tiny little lines that point right towards your light source. That's the very, the easiest way to kind of consider this. But then the other ways are, well, anything from stipple shading to various cross hatchings to various line thicknesses. Also experiment with line length, so for shorter volumes, so that if you notice the wrinkles right by the nose, those aren't very big folds. Like by the time you went up to the cheekbone, how much distance is that? Not very much. So it would make sense to use finer or tinier little rendering lines for that specific area. But if the volume is larger, or say you wanted to shadow from the very base of the chin all the way up to the side of the temple, you could do that with a bunch of tall, thin lines, of course, and then crosshatch maybe the cheekbone, the jaw, under the lip, things like that, to bring that fade kind of, to make it more dimensional. But generally you're not going to. Generally you're just going to grab each volume, and by that I mean like the chin's a volume, the cheekbone's a volume, the side of the masseter muscle by the ear, that's kind of its own volume. And again, breaking these things down into planes, volumes, and then adding your rendering to reflect what it is you see there. Okay, so now blocking in the third example. So by now, hopefully you've got some good practice going in and you're starting to see some patterns here, some ways that you can break down your own artwork and simplify things. So again, going for the major areas. Obviously the top of the head would be in full shadow from a single low light source, and just grabbing big pieces of the top areas of each one of those different forms. The lip, the chin, the nose, each one treating it individually, which will give an overly segmented look. But again, you can do that at first and then slowly kind of connect them together where needed. Now, I particularly like a nice segmented look for this kind of dramatic uplighting. I think it really makes it look more spooky or something. I don't know what the right word is there, but it adds to the effect, and I like it. And again, as I've mentioned at other parts of this course, is that basically when you try to make as many decisions based upon what you know to be true and what you've studied, what you've learned from different artists, from studying from life, all those good things. But then there's a certain amount of it when you come to comics or any kind of storytelling where you're creating the characters, whether it be comics, manga, storyboards, you name it, any of that. You're going to just bring a certain amount of your style to it. It's not like everything's going to be 100% correct. Oh yes, the shadow would have only hit here and the light would have only hit there. Maybe in a perfect world, but we're being creative here. So we're going to take creative liberties with that. And I like that ability to sometimes stretch or dramatize something that I think just might look cooler this way versus the way it really is. So I never take that off the table. In fact, I enjoy that aspect of creating imaginative characters. But it also takes a certain amount of studying where it's connected to some real knowledge of an understanding of the subject matter, or it just doesn't work, right? In fact, there's always a time and a place to study the way things really look. But then you have to basically translate that into your own style and take some creative liberties with it, explore some various ideas, go against the grain, mix it up. I think that again is another opportunity for you to develop your style and some self-confidence with your own abilities to say, I know this wasn't right, but I made it work. And I think that a lot of the artists that I admire, that I've grown up aspiring to, be a little bit more like and things like that, I think I've always found and appreciated that in their work. Now some just do things so well it looks like it could have been a painting or a photo, and then others they do enough of the areas that are right, that need to be right, and then they explore just a variety of other things that are just sensationalized or super creative or caricaturized. But that's really it. So hopefully these lessons are bringing you some good information on how to go about this and how to explore these various ideas. And I'd love to see your work. So thank you for watching, and more on the way.